Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today, we are in Austria and we're looking at Christian Tschida's 2018 non-tradition Cabernet Franc. I feel like in most wine circles, the name Christian Tschida does not require much of an introduction. The fourth generation in his family to be growing grapes and making wine, Christian would be considered by many to be the father of the natural wine movement in Austria. He began managing his family's vineyard parcels at the age of 27, and with this beginning, he set out to chart a slightly unconventional course, making wines in ways that were very different from his peers. Based in the town of Illimitz, Christian is farming around 14 hectares of vineyard parcels that are dotted around the Lake Neusiedl in northern Burgenland, and of this, about 2 hectares are planted with Cabernet Franc. Now, it's well understood that Cabernet Franc is not an important grape variety in Austria. Austria is primarily a white wine producing country, and Grüne is the #1 planted grape variety with about 14,500 hectares under vine. In terms of red wines, 2 early to mid ripening grapes, Zweigelt and Blaufränkisch respectively, reign supreme, and in terms of plantings, we're looking at about 6,129 hectares of Zweigelt and about 2,600 hectares of Blaufränkisch. So what does the Cabernet Franc picture look like in Austria? Well, there's a mere 97 hectares of Cabernet Franc vines planted, and of that, about 77 of those hectares are planted in Burgenland. So with so little plantings of Cabernet Franc in the country, as well as a plethora of indigenous grape varieties, it would take a very special person to want to cultivate and make Cabernet Franc, particularly as a single varietal wine. Sure, as a blending partner, yeah, you could probably phone it in and add a splash of Cabernet Franc to your Blaufränkisch, but to commit to making Cabernet Franc as a varietal wine, that requires tremendous patience and attention to detail. I've observed over the years that when a person chooses to work with Cabernet Franc as a single varietal wine, particularly when it is perhaps not the most obvious choice, it is often because of a particular Loire Valley Cabernet Franc experience or experiences, or a specific Loire Valley Cabernet Franc wine that has ignited a passion in that person for Cabernet Franc. Enter Christian Tschida. So back on a trip to the Loire back in 07, 08, Christian attended a tasting of 30 vintages of Loire versus Bordeaux Cabernet Franc based wines. And at this tasting, it was really the Loire Cabernet Francs that spoke to him. And this is what launched his journey with Cabernet Franc. Back in Austria, a year or so later, Christian had a neighbor who had some very old plantings of Merlot that he was not happy with. The neighbor told Christian that he just never ever liked how the finished wine turned out. And Christian knew why. His neighbor's Merlot was in fact Cabernet Franc. So, being the good neighbor that he was, he kindly said to his neighbor that he would gladly take his Merlot off his hands. So with this fruit, Christian began vinifying his first Cabernet Francs back in 2009 or so. Sadly, Christian isn't working with these parcels anymore, but it was these series of events that really launched his desire to make really great Cabernet Franc. And I listened to an interview with Christian where he talked about how it took him a really long time to figure out how to make his ideal expression of Cabernet Franc in the glass. And the first vintage of the non-tradition red was 2015. And I think this name, non-tradition, perfectly exemplifies this wine, which very much goes against convention as far as Austrian reds are concerned. Now, to make one single varietal Cabernet Franc in Austria, now that would be a formidable effort. But of course, Christian takes this a step further. And he's also making the reds Capital 1, also Hocus Pocus and Engel of Erden, and the rosé Himmel of Erden, all from 100% Cabernet Franc. So with all of that said, let's look at where these Cabernet Franc vines are planted and the overall growing environment in this particular part of Austria. While much of Austria is considered best suited for white wine production, Burgenland is in a unique position here, and Burgenland is really the epicenter of red wine production in the country, and there's several factors here that contribute to this. So the climate of Burgenland, as well as Austria as a whole, would be considered continental. But Burgenland's position in the far eastern part of the country, with its longest border sharing that with the border of Hungary, because of this eastern position, Burgenland receives the strongest influence from the warm air that comes in from the east from the Pannonian Basin, and less of an influence from the Alps to the west, or the cold influence that comes down from the north. So the region as a whole will experience warmer summers as well as a longer growing season, and this is great for ripening longer season red varieties like Cabernet Franc. Burgenland as a whole is quite a large region, and it can be divided into a number of subregions that have their own unique microclimates and soils. And generally speaking, in terms of the climate of these subregions, as we move south in Burgenland, these regions will be getting increasingly warmer as the influence from the Mediterranean becomes a little bit more present. Now, the fruit for today's wine is coming from three single vineyard sites planted across two regions. Two vineyards that are in the Leithaberg region, which is on the west side of Lake Neusiedl in northern Burgenland, and one vineyard that is in the Neusiedlersee region, which is on the east side of Lake Neusiedl in northern Burgenland. And in terms of this lake, so Lake Neusiedl is this very large, shallow lake, and it plays a very important role in influencing the climate in these two regions. So the lake will warm up very quickly in the spring and the summer, and then it will radiate that heat into the vineyards. It will also extend the growing season in the fall. The lake also will help to reflect the sunlight into the vineyards, and all of these factors combine to create an environment that is really good for ripening longer season varieties. Now, additionally, the Leithaberg region on the west side of Lake Neusiedl, experiences, or it benefits from these cool breezes, or this cool air that descends down at nighttime from the Leitha range. This air will help to keep acidities high and maintain finesse in the finished wines. And all of this, of course, is to say that the microclimates of these two regions, from everything that I can see here, would suggest to me that this could be a really good spot for Cabernet Franc. Now, in terms of soils, we have two different soils that are across these two regions. So in the Neusiedlersee, we generally find sandy or silty sandy soils with varying amounts of gravels, and then pockets with a bit more limestone and or quartz, depending on where you are. And then in the Leithaberg region, we find this complex mix of schist and gneiss, coupled with the Leica limestone, which is unique to this particular part of Burgenland. Looking at the vineyard parcels for this wine, this is coming from a selection of about 1 hectare, and the vines are approximately 40 or so years of age. The sites all have a bit more of a western exposure, so they'll get the benefit of that stronger afternoon sunshine. In terms of elevation, we're at about 117 to 250 meters above sea level, so these sites will also experience slightly cooler nights, and this is good because this will help to ensure that the grapes aren't ripening too quickly. And from everything that Christian and his team have shared with me, they've told me that Cabernet Franc seems to be really happy in these particular parcels. I should note as well that Christian is very rigorous and detail-oriented as it relates to the work in the vineyard. All the vineyards are farmed organically, and he is employing the use of cover crops to help to ensure balance of the soil health as well as enhance biodiversity. And then in terms of the harvest time, Christian is very meticulous with how he approaches harvest and the timing of harvest specifically. From a winemaking perspective, the fruit for this wine was all hand harvested and it was destemmed, and then the fermentation is done with indigenous yeast in larger barrels. The time on skins is actually quite long. It's about 6 weeks total, but the maceration is pretty much hands off, so very much through infusion. The aging takes place in neutral stockinger barrels for about 2 years, and then the wine is bottled without any fining, filtration, or added SO2. So let's see what this Austrian Cabernet Franc is giving us today. So immediately when I smell this wine, I smell Cabernet Franc. Like, it just, I taste a lot of Cabernet Franc, and this is Cabernet Franc. There's no hiding it here. And the nose, in terms of the profile, is very lifted and bright. It's a lovely perfume, and the fruits lean more in that red spectrum. And they're savory as well. So I'm getting red currant, There's a bit of a sour cherry thing here. There is a little bit of a lingonberry, maybe a wild strawberry note, but definitely more in that red spectrum and a little bit more on the savory foresty side. I love the pyrazine and the herbal profile of this wine. There's nothing overtly green about this wine. It's more herbal in nature, like a mix of rosemary and mint. There's even like a lemon thyme thing going on. There's also something slightly foresty as well. And there's also a bit of a floral note. There's some spiciness to the nose as well. But overall, the nose is quite inviting as far as, it kind of just makes you want to dive in. On the palate, those same savory, kind of crunchy red fruits come through really nicely. The herbal profile comes through really nicely as well. The palate is quite spicy, and I love that. And the spice profile is nice. There's like a chili flake thing. There's a little bit of a green peppercorn element as well. There's a bit of cinnamon here too, but quite spicy, and I love that. I would say the florals are also a bit more pronounced on the palate. In terms of the acidity, you can see that my mouth is like watering here. The acidity, I love the profiles. Very energetic, very crunchy, sprightly. The acid profile is fantastic. You do sense that this is coming from a cooler microclimate for sure. The tannins are very satiny in terms of texture. There's a moderate amount of tannins, low to moderate amount of tannins here. Satiny texture, finely woven, and they finish with, there's a slight chew, a slight chalkiness to the finish as well. The wine is medium bodied, and in terms of the structure here, this is a lean, focused, stealthy, lithe example of Cabernet Franc. It's really about what the acid is doing to kind of lift this wine and create this levity and this lightness to the wine, but also at the same time, there's a nice middle palate experience here. But really, this is a very particular style of Cabernet Franc that is in that lean, focused, ethereal kind of style of Cabernet Franc. Like if you were a fan of, say, Guy Berthaud or Sylvain Dittier, this is kind of in that same camp stylistically, at least in my experience and in my opinion in tasting this wine today. There's something also about this wine that is very intellectual, and that's truly the best word I can use to describe it. When I was tasting this, I was like immediately transported to like a dark, moody jazz club, and there's like Miles Davis playing and John Coltrane, and that is the vibe here. It's like kind of avant-garde. There's something kind of edgy about it as well, and I dig it. I'm into it, and it does have this very specific kind of energy to it. Yeah, overall it's balanced. It's got a nice juiciness to the fruit profile, which is bringing some ease and pleasure. But at the same time, it's really this contemplative, intellectual, groovy style of Cabernet Franc. And this is really my first introduction to Christian's wines. And, I'm curious. I want to get to Austria. It's a bit of, it would require me to go well out of my way. He's really the only one in Austria that is working with Cabernet Franc. So it would require a bit of a side trip, but I mean, he's making how many reds? He's making a rosé. He obviously really digs this grape variety and believes in it and believes in his terroirs and believes in making a really fantastic wine. And if you're not familiar with Christian's Cabernet Francs, these are wines that to keep on your radar. They're small production. They're not everywhere, but certainly if you see it in a restaurant or at a local shop, this is something to check out. I think this wine will benefit from a little bit of oxygen. I will be very keen to see how this evolves over the course of a few hours, because even now it's just getting more and more exciting with a bit more oxygen. But this is a fantastic introduction finally to Christian's Cabernet Francs, and I can't wait to taste more. If you've had Christian's wines before and his Cabernet Franc, let me know what you thought of them in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.